It was supposed to be a night of celebration. Cameras flashing, champagne flowing, and one of Hollywood's biggest stars roasting the crowd for laughs. But when Michael B. Jordan turned his spotlight on Karoline Leavitt's soft-spoken husband, no one expected what came next. The laughter died quickly, because the man everyone mocked had vanished. And hours later, every security feed in the building went dark. Who really walked into that gala? And why did Michael's joke trigger a chain of events that could topple an entire government? The ballroom shimmered under the warm gold of 1,000 hanging lights, each crystal reflecting a world where reputations were currency and charm was a weapon. The Liberty Foundation Gala was more than a fundraiser. It was a power stage, where politicians, celebrities, and billionaires paraded their alliances behind sequined gowns and tuxedos. In the middle of it all, Karoline Leavitt smiled her well-rehearsed political smile, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man who barely looked like he belonged. Ethan Leavitt, quiet and stiff in a suit that somehow looked borrowed, seemed more like a background prop than the husband of one of the most ambitious young candidates in the country. They didn't know what he was hiding. Not yet. Michael B. Jordan arrived with the kind of magnetic presence that turned heads and stopped conversations. Flanked by his entourage, he brought the casual confidence of someone too famous to ever feel vulnerable. Tonight, he was the keynote speaker and honorary host, chosen to add Hollywood charm to political prestige. When he took the mic midway through the evening, the room buzzed with anticipation. Michael launched into a series of light jabs and scripted jokes aimed at high-profile guests. But then his eyes fell on Ethan. "Yo, someone tell the waiter he can relax now, we've all got drinks," he quipped, nodding toward the stiff, awkward man beside Karoline. Laughter erupted. Cameras flashed. Ethan blinked slowly, saying nothing. Karoline's smile wavered, barely noticeable. Michael chuckled. "Nah, seriously, though, what does a guy like you do when your wife's out here conquering the political world?" The crowd leaned in, hungry for the tension. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for something worse, a small black card he handed to the nearest aide, whispering something no mic picked up. Then he left. No scene. No words. Just a calm, quiet exit that most people barely noticed. But someone did. Backstage, the event's head of security checked the time. Moments later, all internal Wi-Fi networks began flickering. Live streams started buffering. External feeds cut to black. The team blamed it on bandwidth. But Ethan Leavitt, the man everyone just mocked, had ghosted without triggering a single camera. And Karoline. She stood rooted to the spot, her fingers trembling slightly on her champagne glass. She knew something was wrong. Not because Ethan had been humiliated, but because she had seen that look before, the one he wore before disappearing for 6 months during the early years of their marriage. And when he returned then, it came with a different name and a forged passport. The guests danced, oblivious. Michael made another joke, shifting targets. Karoline kept her eyes on the door Ethan had walked through. She wasn't thinking about optics anymore. She was thinking about the envelope he once told her never to open unless he vanished. It was in the drawer at home. And now, after 3 years of forgetting it existed, it called to her like a silent alarm. Because Ethan Leavitt was no ordinary husband. He was a man with buried blood on his hands. And this gala had just triggered something nobody in that room was ready for. Long before anyone ever whispered the name Karoline Leavitt in political circles, before her speeches became trending topics and her image graced donor galas and think tanks, Ethan Leavitt was already a man trained to vanish. Long before he became her husband, he was something far more dangerous, an asset with no past. Ethan had never applied for a job in the traditional sense. He had been recruited. Years ago, plucked from an elite cybersecurity tournament in Brussels under an alias, he was quietly absorbed into a shadow agency so secretive that even its own agents questioned its legitimacy. He was brilliant, invisible, and morally flexible enough to write code that could ruin regimes, but disciplined enough to leave no trace. His life became a stream of encrypted briefings, staged hotel rooms, and dead drops disguised as weather apps. For 6 years, Ethan didn't exist, not officially, not legally. But he had power, the kind that left no fingerprints. That life ended with a botched operation in Moldova, an assignment meant to dismantle a rogue communications network that turned out to be a decoy. Ethan's entire team vanished in a single night. He survived only by accident, or design. No one ever confirmed. Disillusioned and fractured, he disappeared off-grid and reappeared in New Hampshire with a new name, a modest bank account, and a quiet hunger for something resembling real life. He met Karoline at a campaign fundraiser for a friend he barely remembered. She was fire. She asked questions he wasn't used to answering. Unlike anyone else, she didn't pry about his work. She assumed he was boring. That was part of the charm. For Ethan, after years of calculated deceit, her transparency was a novelty. For Karoline, his silence was stability. Within 18 months, they were married. He told her he used to work in private security, that he was out of the game, and that she would never be in danger. She believed him, partly because she wanted to and partly because the quiet life she envisioned couldn't afford to look too deeply. And he wanted her to have that life, wanted to bury the ghosts and slip into normalcy like it was something he hadn't destroyed for others 100 times before. But habits die hard. Ethan still encrypted his emails, still ran diagnostic scans on their home network, still placed their bed facing the door. He never sat with his back to a window, and once, when Karoline surprised him in the hallway in the dark, he instinctively slammed her against the wall before his brain caught up to his reflexes. He apologized for days. She chalked it up to trauma he refused to speak about. But she never asked again. And though he tried, Ethan never quite settled. As Karoline's political star rose, so too did the shadows in their home. He never attended interviews. He avoided press events unless coerced. Every photo of them together had the same dynamic, Karoline beaming, Ethan hovering beside her like a bodyguard in a borrowed tux. Some whispered he was insecure. Others assumed he was simply forgettable. No one suspected the truth. No one guessed that in the fireproof safe beneath their floorboards was a series of drives, each one capable of exposing global secrets so devastating, even governments would deny their existence. Ethan hadn't planned to use them. Not until now. Because what Michael didn't know when he mocked the quiet husband on stage was that he wasn't ridiculing a nobody, he was triggering a man who had trained his entire life to never be seen, and who could dismantle your world with a 30-second keystroke. And when Ethan handed that black card to the aide before vanishing from the gala, it wasn't a business card or a threat, it was a fingerprint to an identity long buried, one that opened backdoors into places no one should ever find again. Karoline, back in their home that night, opened the drawer. Inside was the envelope Ethan told her to open only if he disappeared without a trace. Inside it was a single phrase, "Innocence is just the first casualty." Attached was a second note, hastily scribbled, "Check the blue drive. If they come for you, lie." Her hands trembled as she opened the hidden compartment beneath the drawer and retrieved a flash drive labeled in Cyrillic. She stared at it, heart pounding. She wasn't just a rising politician anymore. She was now a variable in a game she had never been trained to play. She had no idea what her husband was truly capable of. But by morning, the world would. The morning after the gala was unusually quiet. Social media hummed with photos from the previous night, headlines about Karoline Leavitt's rising influence, and obligatory praise for Michael B. Jordan's speech. A few clips went viral, especially the one where he poked fun at the mysterious guy standing next to Karoline. It had all the makings of clickbait, a Hollywood icon, a political darling, and a silent man mistaken for a waiter. Ethan's reaction, or lack thereof, became a meme within hours. The internet laughed. Late-night hosts laughed. But Karoline didn't. Because Ethan never came home. His phone rang twice in the middle of the night. She hadn't answered the first time, thinking he'd simply needed air. The second time, she picked up and heard only static, and what sounded like someone typing. Not furiously, not in panic, but in a methodical, rhythmic cadence. Then silence. She hadn't slept. At dawn, she powered up an old laptop Ethan had kept under their guest bed, one he told her never to touch. It had no browser. No apps. Just one encrypted folder named Black Sun. She didn't know the password. But when she plugged in the blue drive, the screen came to life. A single video file loaded, time-stamped 4 years earlier. She hesitated only a moment before pressing play. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. A group of men in military gear were loading crates onto a nondescript plane. A voice spoke Russian in the background, subtitled automatically on screen thanks to Ethan's coding. They were talking about transferring asset stock to a facility in a region she recognized, Belarus. One of the voices joked about how long the kids could last before breaking. The word kids repeated in her mind like a thunderclap. She paused the video. In the bottom corner was a logo she hadn't seen before, but it matched the insignia on the badge of one of her wealthiest donors. She stared, her breath catching. This wasn't a political liability. This was something darker. Something that made her husband's silence no longer feel like paranoia, but survival instinct. Meanwhile, across the city, Michael B. Jordan's team arrived at the luxury hotel suite reserved for his post-gala meetings. His assistant, Jade, noticed immediately that something was off. The room had been entered. Michael's tablet was gone. His email was inaccessible. When he opened his laptop, a message flashed across the screen: "You talk too much." Under it, a live feed began playing, grainy security footage from the ballroom the night before. It zoomed in on Michael making the joke about Ethan. Then it cut to black. No sender. No trace. Security swept the suite, but the lock showed no signs of forced entry. Hotel surveillance caught nothing. Michael was livid, until he got a call from his publicist, warning him to lay low. Apparently, one of his old business partners had been implicated in a scandal overseas, and there were whispers that a video might surface. "How is that connected to Ethan?" he asked, pacing. "Who the hell is that guy?" No one had answers. Jade managed to track down an old file from a private vetting company that had once been hired to do a background check on Karoline and her husband. She skimmed it. Half the lines were redacted. The last note before the document cut off read, "Do not engage. Subject flagged by Agency X75R passive threat." Karoline left her home through the back alley and got into a car she hadn't driven in over a year, one Ethan had insisted she keep just in case. The glove box contained a burner phone with a sticky note attached. "Call this number if I disappear." Her hands shook as she dialed. It rang 4 times, then connected. A voice answered, distorted. "You opened the drive." Karoline's mouth was dry. "Where is Ethan?" The voice paused. "Moving pieces. You need to understand, Karoline, this isn't about you or him anymore. The gala was a test. He knew Jordan would take the bait. They always mock what they don't understand." The call ended. By noon, Karoline's campaign received an anonymous tip about a financial discrepancy in one of their donor accounts. The donor, the same man whose insignia appeared in the video. An emergency press team was assembled. Meanwhile, Michael's security was compromised again. His personal assistant's car was hacked and rerouted without her knowing. Every sign pointed to one chilling truth: someone was sending a message, and that someone was Ethan. But why? Why now? Because Ethan hadn't been humiliated. He had been provoked. And when Michael B. Jordan made that joke, he didn't just mock a man, he pulled a pin from a grenade years in the making. Ethan had spent years disappearing into silence, letting Karoline believe he had walked away from it all. But in truth, he'd been preparing. Waiting. Watching the very people who used to pay for silence climb the ladders of fame, wealth, and political influence. Michael's joke wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a signal. A challenge. And Ethan's response wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The kind that costs more than careers. The kind that burns everything down. In the days that followed the gala, a storm of tension gripped everyone connected to it, but none more than Karoline Leavitt, who moved like a woman wading through a minefield with no map and no allies. On the surface, her campaign proceeded as if nothing had happened. Press releases, appearances, interviews. But behind closed doors, something far more sinister was unraveling. She began receiving emails that vanished moments after opening, signed with a single letter, E. Each message contained fragments, coordinates, phrases in other languages, and names she dared not say aloud. The second message simply read, "Remember Dover. Basement file." Her breath caught. Dover was where she'd once given a closed-door policy speech to a group of undisclosed donors, one of whom had asked strange, invasive questions afterward. She'd brushed it off then. But now, as she rifled through an old campaign storage unit labeled Archives, she found a file folder marked Dover, off record. Inside were photographs that should never have existed. Her standing in a room beside 3 men with their faces blurred, and on the back of each photo, coordinates written in Ethan's distinct, blocky handwriting. She wasn't the only one being hunted by truth. Michael B. Jordan's team had shifted their base of operations to a guarded private residence in the hills. His legal advisors advised silence, his PR team warned him not to escalate, but Michael wasn't built to be silent. That night, ignoring protocol, he drove himself to a private dinner with a defense contractor who owed him a favor. Over filet mignon and closed curtains, Michael asked, "Who the hell is Ethan Leavitt?" The contractor went pale. "You mean Echo?" Michael blinked. "Echo?" The man leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "That's what they used to call him. In the black files. Echo doesn't speak unless it's to end something. You mocked Echo." Michael sat back, suddenly very aware of how deeply out of his depth he was. Meanwhile, Karoline returned home to find her power out and the security system offline. Her first instinct was to run, but then she noticed something strange. The security footage, despite the outage, was playing on a small backup screen. It showed her standing in her kitchen the night before, but from an angle that shouldn't exist. Ethan had set up a private camera, separate from the house's main system. She rewound it, hands trembling, and froze the frame. At 2:34 a.m., a man in a suit entered through the side door. He walked with purpose, bypassed the kitchen, and went straight into the basement. 10 minutes later, he exited. She paused it, zoomed in. The face was familiar. Senator Marshall's chief advisor, the same man who had sat beside her at the Dover meeting. She checked her alarms. No record of a breach. Ethan hadn't been paranoid. He'd been surveilling threats she didn't even know existed. By morning, the media exploded with the leak of an anonymous dossier implicating several political donors, including the one tied to the Belarus facility, in a covert human trafficking ring disguised as an offshore humanitarian initiative. The source? Unverified. But the timestamps matched the encrypted emails Karoline had received. Publicly, she denounced the report as dangerous misinformation, but privately, she shut herself in her study and stared at the monitor showing a blinking green, Ethan's signal. He was still transmitting. Still watching. Michael, refusing to be a passive player, arranged a private meeting with Karoline through a mutual contact. They met in a silent parking garage beneath an abandoned hotel, phones in Faraday pouches, no security. "He's coming for all of us," Michael said. Karoline didn't deny it. She looked worn, the edges of her composure fraying. "He thinks he's saving me," she said softly. "He thinks the only way to do that is to burn the world down before it gets to me first." Michael leaned against a pillar, suddenly less confident. "Do you know what he wants?" Karoline shook her head. "Not yet. But I know what he's willing to lose." Later that night, Ethan's presence grew bolder. From an unknown server, he accessed the Liberty Foundation's internal records, deleting financial logs and replacing them with footage of the Belarus shipments. The boardroom fell into chaos. 2 major donors stepped down. Investigations launched. Karoline's campaign manager resigned without explanation. And still, Ethan remained invisible, communicating only through digital shadows and coded messages. He sent Karoline one more note. "They lied to both of us. You're still their pawn unless you act." She didn't respond. But she opened the next file without hesitation. Then came the most terrifying breach yet. Michael's personal assistant, Jade, vanished for 13 hours. When she returned, she had no memory of where she'd been. Her phone was wiped. Her car returned to its original GPS location, refueled. In her pocket was a Polaroid of her and Michael, taken at the gala. A red X was drawn over Michael's face. They both knew who had left it. This was no longer just about revenge or exposure. Ethan wasn't playing chess. He was flipping the board, one move at a time. And the most terrifying part. He hadn't even revealed the worst secret yet. Because Ethan's endgame wasn't about truth, it was about leverage. And both Michael and Karoline were running out of time to figure out which side of the fire they stood on before everything was consumed. By the time the fifth day dawned, Karoline had abandoned any illusion that her life would return to normal. Her publicist continued spinning the media narrative, blaming foreign misinformation campaigns for the leaked footage and documents, but even within her own party, whispers had turned into suspicion. Behind the curtain of politics and pageantry, every powerful figure she once considered an ally had gone silent or distant, suddenly too busy to take her calls. The anonymous files continued to pour in, and though none directly implicated her, they tied her donors to horrific crimes, financial manipulation, proxy wars, even human trafficking under the guise of humanitarian aid. One of the leaked names matched the vice chair of her fundraising committee. Another sat on the board of her alma mater. But the final file was different. It wasn't a document, or a video, or a spreadsheet. It was a recording, audio only, barely 2 minutes long. She played it once, then played it again with her hand over her mouth. The voice was Michael's. The recording had been made 6 months ago during a private dinner in Monaco, where Michael had been fundraising for a documentary. In the background was laughter, champagne, conversation. Then his voice, crisp and careless. "I'm not worried about any of those politicians. Most of them are bought already. Karoline Leavitt. She's young, malleable. They've got her right where they want her." Then a toast. Then silence. Karoline sat frozen. She had never been to Monaco. She hadn't even known Michael had ever spoken about her. Yet there it was, confirmation that even her political rise had been manipulated, orchestrated by people who never intended for her to truly lead. Her hands clenched into fists. She hadn't been the only one played, but she had been played the longest. Across town, Michael's frustration had curdled into fear. Jade had quit without explanation. One of his bank accounts had been drained overnight, not entirely, but enough to send a message. The authorities were no help. Every trace of Ethan Leavitt led to black holes, dead IDs, wiped logs. Desperate, Michael arranged another meeting with Karoline, this time not to confront, but to confess. They met in the backroom of a shuttered bookstore where Michael arrived early and alone. When Karoline stepped in, she didn't sit. She handed him a device and pressed play. As the Monaco recording echoed off the walls, Michael's expression changed from confusion to panic. "I never said that," he insisted. "That night, I was with journalists the whole time." Karoline stared at him. "You're being framed," she said. "Just like I was manipulated. And Ethan, he's not trying to burn it all down. He's trying to flush them out." It was the only thing that made sense. Ethan hadn't attacked them. He'd drawn them into the open. Every file, every leak, every scare tactic, it wasn't destruction. It was bait. And now, they were both dangling on the hook. But who was Ethan really after? That question was answered when Karoline received an encrypted message with a single attachment, a live video feed of a luxury conference room in Washington, D.C. Inside were 5 men and 1 woman, all in suits, none of them publicly linked but all recognizable from confidential campaign briefings. In the middle of the table was a briefcase. Ethan's voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. "They have 3 hours to announce a full resignation. Or I make the briefcase public." Michael leaned in. "What's in it?" Karoline shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, he's been building toward this for years." Then, another message came, this one addressed directly to Michael. "You've been their puppet, just like her. Your influence was their Trojan horse. But I need you now. Meet me where it began." Below the message were coordinates that led not to a government building or a war room, but to a small boxing gym in Brooklyn. Michael arrived first. The gym was empty, dimly lit. Old posters curled at the corners. A bell echoed in the silence. Then Ethan stepped out from the shadows, no longer a ghost, but a man. Unshaven, eyes hollow, movements precise. He didn't speak at first. Just stared. Then, finally, "I watched you for 2 years. You didn't even know you were compromised." That's the problem with fame, it makes you loud and blind. Michael stepped forward, defensive. You set me up. Ethan nodded. To expose them, I had to. You were the match. Karoline was the fuse. They lit both of you thinking they'd get smoke. Instead, they'll get fire. Then Ethan tossed Michael a drive. That's the backup. If I go dark, release it. Every name, every account, every deal. Michael hesitated. Why trust me now? Ethan's answer was chilling. Because they'll come for you before they come for her. You're louder. Then he disappeared through the back door. Michael stood in the silence, holding the weight of a future he never wanted. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was a failsafe. At that moment, Karoline received one final encrypted message from Ethan. It read, "You were never their pawn. You were always the queen. Time to move diagonally." She understood the reference. Ethan had always loved chess metaphors. But this one felt different. It was his way of saying, step off the path they gave you. Burn the map. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp, but Karoline Leavitt stood behind the curtain at 9:43, her hand curled tightly around the edge of the podium, her breath shallow and practiced. Outside, reporters buzzed with anticipation, unaware they were about to witness the political equivalent of a controlled demolition. The rumors had reached fever pitch, secret donors exposed, campaign managers disappearing, Michael B. Jordan implicated in what some believed was a psychological warfare op gone wrong. But Karoline's face betrayed none of that. Her makeup was immaculate, her hair pinned with precision. Only her eyes gave away the storm behind her stillness. She knew that after today, nothing would be the same. Not for her, not for Michael, and certainly not for Ethan, who had disappeared again after the Brooklyn handoff, leaving only a note on her windshield. History forgets the pawns. Don't let it forget the ones who sacrificed. She stepped into the light. Cameras clicked like gunfire. The usual opening lines were gone. No thanks to sponsors, no references to party platforms. Instead, she began with a question that left the room hushed. Have you ever wondered why some truths never make it to the surface? Why the loudest voices are often the most manipulated? A single breath. Today, I won't be defending myself. I'll be exposing the system that tried to use me. Then came the drive, projected behind her on a screen, every file sanitized and verified. No names blurred. No accounts hidden. 6 high-level political figures were indicted before noon. 3 resigned within the hour. 2 attempted to flee the country. 1 was found dead by midnight. But Ethan? He was nowhere. Some said he'd gone underground again, deeper than before. Others believed he was dead, erased by the very forces he exposed. Michael, for his part, went quiet in the days following Karoline's speech. But not because he was ashamed, because he had seen the truth in full. The drive Ethan gave him was a failsafe, yes, but it also contained something else. Footage of himself being surveilled, his own assistant's betrayal, and the real puppet masters pulling strings through entertainment, policy, and perception. For the first time, Michael wasn't the center of the story. He was its echo. And that revelation changed him. Karoline's approval ratings plummeted, then spiked. The public didn't know what to believe. Some hailed her as a hero, others called her a traitor. But what no one could deny was that she had detonated the facade that had masked the political elite for decades. Every interview she gave afterward was precise, strategic. She never mentioned Ethan's name again. She never admitted what he had done, nor denied it. Instead, she became a symbol of quiet resistance, one foot still in the system, the other always ready to step off the board. And in the background, ripples grew. Investigations opened in 3 countries. Foreign diplomats were recalled. A humanitarian organization disbanded overnight. The Belarus facility was raided by an unnamed task force, but by the time they arrived, it had been scrubbed clean. No records. No staff. Just one message spray-painted on the wall in red: Echo was here. That tag began appearing elsewhere, on protest signs, across underground forums, even on encrypted military channels. It wasn't just Ethan's alias anymore. It was an idea. A warning. Jade, Michael's former assistant, resurfaced weeks later, confessing to being a paid informant for a clandestine think tank with links to defense lobbying. She wept on live television, admitting she had been blackmailed into monitoring Michael's movements and conversations. Her revelations turned the spotlight even further away from celebrity and onto infrastructure, the silent world behind policies, fame, and finance. What had started as a joke at a gala had unraveled a network that spanned continents. And yet, what remained most haunting was the silence that followed. Ethan never reappeared. Karoline never pursued him. Not because she didn't care, but because she understood that his role had always been temporary and that he had finished the mission. He never spoke aloud, not just to expose the guilty, but to awaken the innocent. In private, she sometimes wrote letters to him, unsure where to send them, if anywhere. She never signed them. Just initials. Just in case. Michael returned to the public eye 1 month later with a quiet op-ed in The Atlantic. It read like a confession, not of guilt, but of awakening. He called the incident the price of not paying attention and urged others in his world to look closer at what they supported, endorsed, or allowed to remain invisible. He didn't name Ethan. But he thanked the man who had taught him the value of silence, strategy, and purpose. The world had changed, but not dramatically. Just enough to notice the shift if you were paying attention. And maybe that was the point. Not to bring the world to its knees, but to nudge it just far enough off balance that people started asking questions they'd never dared ask before. About who controls what. About why certain stories rise while others vanish. About who's standing next to power in silence, and what they might be waiting for.